appreciate everyone's participation in today's event. We look forward to providing enough information to tease you, but welcome you back to participate at a future date in our bond finance program. I'm going to start out by going to our prepackaged presentation that I will ask, I think Mrs. McGraw can start the slides on this one. And we'll take you through about 10, 11 slides that talks about the bond program and the relaunch. So here we go. You ready? Are we queued up, McGraw? I'm hoping we're queued up on the first slide, are we?
We are. Perfect.
Okay. Again, welcome to our program. The Affordable Housing Bond Finance Program is what we call it. And as you see, we are looking forward to moving quickly into the relaunching our program for the benefit of increasing the number of affordable housing in the Prince George's County area. Our county executive, Ms. Angela Alsobrooks, made a very, very warm statement towards the relaunch of our program. As you see, the relaunch of the tax-exempt bond program is another huge step in our efforts to expand affordable housing in the Prince George's area. We appreciate her and her support for that. Let's talk a little bit about the program and the goals and objectives. As you see, our goal is to provide tax-exempt bond financing for those affordable multifamily projects that are coming up that will increase the amount and the diversity of housing in the Prince George's County area, and with a very strong affordable housing tinge to it. To achieve this goal, our objectives are promote affordable rental housing opportunities for low to moderate income individuals and families and seniors, provide flexible project financing that supports a wide range of housing types, support adaptive reuse of non-residential buildings, very creative, preserve existing housing. And the other side of this coin is we want to add a level of efficiency by being a very boutique type shop as a financier. So we look forward to utilizing these statements to guide us in every aspect of relaunching this program. You may ask, what areas are we targeting? Well, the county executive, as well as a host of other knowledgeable folk within Prince George's County's government, has said these are some of the target areas that we really want to concentrate as we try to increase the density of affordable housing. The Inner Beltway, transit-oriented development, opportunity zones, of course, and designated development areas. You may or may not have projects in those areas, but if you do, we'd like to hear from you as we start the relaunch of this program. Eligible uses, plain and simple, new construction projects and those projects that preserve or rehabilitate existing affordable multifamily. We are really focusing on increasing the number of affordable multifamily housing for families and seniors in the Prince George's County region. What are the requirements? This is something that is not from Prince George's County, but if you use tax-exempt bonds and low-income housing tax credits, you have to meet these formulas. At least 20% of the units must be set aside for low-income households earning at or less than 50% of the AMI. And we use, I think, the Metropolitan AMI for Washington, D.C. I almost certainly do. Secondly, or at least 40% of the units must be set aside for households earning at or less than 60% of the AMI. Let's talk a little bit about our process. This flowchart kind of gives you a better understanding of how this program will exist It may be comparative to other programs, but we have a sponsor who comes to us for our product. We're using the established Form 202 that most of you developers, if you've been in this market doing business, you know the 202 form. We'll go to a threshold criteria review. We will go to a preliminary feasibility assessment. If there are any issues, we will circle back and say, here's some things that you may need to clean up, please resubmit. If there are no issues, we move over, and that goes to our board for inducement resolution. Then it goes to the critical state of being underwritten by our in-house underwriters. That goes to our selected credit committee. In that process, we'll have a 7-day notice of the tariff and then a hearing for it, but then we'll have a paralleling track that goes through the board resolution, has to go through a legislative process to get us to a final resolution. At that point, we should be in a position where we can say, thank you, it has been great, and the bond should be issued. Talk a little bit about timelines. I think it's critical. One of the things that we hope to make us a competitive shop is that we're small enough to provide you that hands-on service. But at the same time, we do know that there are some timing mechanisms that you as a applicant want to know about. So if we go through this, applicant, your time, we're estimating 10 hours for you to complete the 202 and the 203. Review of the threshold criteria, 2 to 3 days. Preliminary feasibility assessment, processing time 3 to 5 days. Our board will get that, and we give them a processing time of 5 days from when they get the information and when we come to them for an adjudication. That pushes us towards our full underwriting, and the scope of that underwriting can be a process in itself, but we hope that that underwriting will keep us right around a week to 2 week time frame. Credit committee, once they get the deal, we should be in front of a credit committee for approval on the same day. The hearing that we talked about, a 7-day notice, it is what it is. It'll go through a process, and at the end of that process, it should have 1 day to land. The Board of Commissioners will give a draft resolution that shouldn't take anything but a day. And when it goes through the county council process, we're estimating from previous types dealings that that's a 90-day process to get the final resolution. We hope that this is competitive, and we hope that those organizations who have been a part of a bond financing project like that will fit into this mold, you understand that process, and hopefully we've hit most of the high points, and the process time is something that you're familiar with. Interesting part, let's talk about fees. We have a $5,000 application fee that does not go into the financing fee. The inducement resolution fee is 15 basis points, and that can be credited towards the financing fee. The commitment fee, 25 basis points, again, that can be credited towards the financing fee. The financing fee itself is 100 basis points. So when you total the inducement and the commitment fee, you're about 140 basis points, which makes us very competitive in this market amongst other organizations of like ilk that have tax-exempt bond allocations to provide for financing. Also, the Housing Authority will have or instill an annual servicing fee of 25 basis points of the original bond amount. Note that none of these fees will cover or can suffice for third-party fees. Those are not included. And at closing, the initial annual servicing fee will be an upfront fee with a periodic annual fee thereafter. We're going to move towards a panel discussion, and I'm very pleased to say that we have 3 very capable individuals to be a part of our panel. And I will give you a very brief background of those individuals' bios. Ms. Daniels. Ms. Daniels is partner with the law firm of Kutakrock and serves as the chair of the firm's Washington, D.C. Public Finance Department. Ms. Daniels concentrates her practice in tax-exempt and taxable debt offerings for state and local government entities and nonprofit organizations. In the area of housing, Mr. Daniel serves as multifamily and single-family bond counsel to a number of state and local bond issuers in Maryland and in the District of Columbia. We really appreciate her joining us. Sydney, I hope I don't mispronounce your last name, Garshik. Sydney is the founder and president of MRK Partners, Inc. That organization was founded in 2015. It's a privately held real estate investment and asset management company specializing in the acquisition, preservation, and repositioning of affordable housing. The organization's portfolio currently consists of projects located throughout California, Michigan, Florida, Maryland, and Virginia. Lastly, we have Ms. Tanya Dempsey. Ms. Dempsey is the principal of CSG Advisors, where she focuses on advising housing authorities on the RAD process, operational improvements, portfolio analysis, and structuring affordable housing transactions, including 4% low-income housing tax credits, tax-exempt bonds, conventional financing, and other federal mortgage options. We appreciate those individuals being a part of this presentation. And last but not least, additional resources. We have a link to the Housing Authority's website. And on that website, you will find our Affordable Housing Bond Finance Program Middle Housing Guide. You will find the term sheet, as well as Form 202 and 203 for your application process. Again, I'd like to give credit where credit is due. The staff of the Development, Modernization, and Bond Finance Program includes Ms. Boyce, Mr. Jackson, Mrs. Zanlotti. And you have the email for submittal. That is the culmination of our presentation. We will move towards our panel discussion. As Mr. Sims said before, we will ask the participants if you have a question to put it in the chat, and we will read it from the chat. I appreciate your attendance, and we'll move to a panel discussion. And because I am the host, I get to ask the first set of questions. So my first question will go to Ms. Daniel. Ms. Daniel, first question. What are some of the financing structures you're currently seeing in our marketplace? You're on mute.
Thank you. I'd first like to thank the authority for the opportunity to participate in the roundtable and the relaunch of its program. As to structures, we're seeing a whole host, which I think will be familiar with, to a bunch of the developer industry on the call. Certainly tax-exempt loans that are made by Freddie Mac to a governmental lender like the authority, where the proceeds of that tax-exempt loan are then loaned to a borrower and secured by either cash on a forward basis or in an immediate scenario, by either cash or mortgage on a forward basis, or in an immediate scenario mortgage. And then the proceeds used to construct or rehabilitate a development. The parties to the Freddie Tel transactions can be numerous, but because it's not a publicly offered structure, oftentimes there are savings there. In addition, we see publicly offered deals structured as short-term cash collateralized bonds. Usually those structures involve taxable Ginnie Maes, where the proceeds of which really are what are used to construct the project. And then bonds are issued to satisfy the LIHTC 50% test, and those bonds are cash collateralized with a bankruptcy remote source, usually the Ginnie Mae lenders' warehouse funds, which are reimbursed as Ginnie Maes are sold. Oftentimes on those deals, bond proceeds above the amount of the taxable Ginnie Mae are required, and there may be additional short-term bond, an additional short-term bond amount that is collateralized with some other remote source, like a bridge loan or proceeds of a letter of credit, or other bankruptcy remote source. We've also seen a couple of long-term Ginnie Mae deals. Those are publicly offered bond deals where the Ginnie Mae MBS directly secures the bonds. Saw a lot more of these in the early 2000s with an IBP and before the '08 crash. But we have started to see long-term Ginnie Mae deals pop up as well. Another publicly offered structure are Fannie Mae MTEBs. And those are pass-through bond deals where the bonds are structured like a traditional MBS would be, where as monthly payments are made on the mortgage loan, they are passed through under the MBS to a trustee, and the trustee then passes them through on a monthly basis to bondholders. Those can be structured as forwards, which require some sort of cash collateral, or if there's just moderate rehab, there can be immediate fundings where the project has a mortgage and the loan starts amortizing at closing. We also see a lot of traditional direct placements, where there's a bank involved and the project is mortgage secured, guarantees, and other sorts of security for the issuer of the project. The issuer fee even sometimes can be guaranteed. And again, that's a bond that's purchased by a bond purchaser secured by a mortgage. Those also take the form of tax-exempt loans, which some banks prefer for a number of reasons, including that they can get some additional CRA credit. And then we also see a bunch of FHA risk sharing insured deals. So those are a few structures that we tend to work on really daily in our practice.
That is awesome. I think those are very helpful understandings that any participant would see as a focal point of what they may need to be looking at, especially from looking at the capital stack and how their sources of financing will come into being. I have another question. Are there any takeaways or critical legal issues to keep in mind as deals employing those structures proceed to closing?
Sure, there's several. So one of the things that we often have to confront as bond counsel are program investment issues where there are related parties on a transaction. So the bond purchaser is related for tax purposes. I mean, that's a determination that bond counsel would make where there's common ownership of more than 50%. So where the bond purchaser is more than 50% related, usually to the equity investor. This is coming up a lot as banks consolidate and they, decide to get into both the debt and equity side of a deal. There are any number of ways, for the most part, to structure around the related party issues. See them a lot on, well, not a lot, but where the issue will come up oftentimes is on the direct placements or the tails. It's not as big of an issue on publicly offered deals where there are a number of investors and it's hard to get to the 50% threshold. But that's certainly one issue.
Can I just ask a follow-up here, right? So can you just explain for the group why it's an issue and what
Sure.
the impacts are on the related parties? Because I find this actually comes up a lot in the work that we do kind of across the country. And I think you're totally right. It's going to come up more. So I think it's important for folks when they're contemplating bringing deals to the housing authority to be mindful of what these issues might be.
Sure. So one of the biggest issues is that the issuer, our authority who's relaunching its program, will be limited in the fees that it can collect to 1/8 of 1%. And, meaning that the mortgage loan yield cannot exceed the bond yield by more than 1/8 of 1%. And so to the extent that particularly, for example, on a short-term deal where the bonds are not outstanding long enough to allow the fees to sort of enjoy the benefit of long amortization, then the fees that the issuer would otherwise be able to collect are limited, which may or may not, depending upon the authority's underwriting, qualify a deal to move forward.
Follow up. The fees that you're speaking of, can you put some title behind those particular fees, or is
Sure.
that a total global fee on the whole fee structure?
There are some fees that we can exclude out. We kind of have to take a look at the purpose of the fees. So if it's if the fee is for a purpose of construction monitoring, and that's something that your program and policy materials would need to call out right away, and this varies bond counsel to bond counsel, but we would exclude that from mortgage loan yield. But really, any of your other financing fees would be impacted by this rule. So the fees that were on this slide in your presentation, for example, would be impacted by this rule.
And what are some ways that you've seen projects resolve this, right? So it happens, in this, like, let's just use an example, right? It's maybe you have a syndicator that's providing the equity, and their upper tier investor is also your construction debt provider, right? So that's like a real kind of concrete, that's where this issue would come up. And so what are some ways that you can think of that help, how would we handle that?
So one way is in the execution that you select. So for example, on a Freddie Tail, and you're using your example, Tanya, where the construction lender is related to the upper tier investor, Freddie Tails are structured in this way. There's an initial funding lender that is not Freddie, and on a forward deal or even on an immediate deal, but we're talking about construction here. So on a forward deal, the initial funding lender makes the loan to the governmental lender, and then construction proceeds. One thing that we've seen issuers or borrowers or issuers do is select a nominal initial funding lender, another lender that's not that construction lender who takes construction risk, make the tax-exempt loan, and then identify some source of collateral during the construction period, cash collateral, that can be used in place of the direct construction period debt. And oftentimes it might be the construction loan proceeds. There is still a little bit of a short period of time where we may have related party issues, and we've worked with our clients to structure the fees to get around or at least minimize the time during which the fee has to be limited. But one way to do it is to, during the construction phase, before the construction debt matures, is to find another nominal tax-exempt purchaser or lender who actually makes the tax-exempt loan or, buys the tax-exempt bond. And then that way get rid of the relatedness.
Yeah, I mean, the other way to sort of resolve that, right, could also be to just pivot to a public offering.
Sure,
right?
absolutely.
So all of what we're describing, just to be super specific, is that these are all direct placements where you've kind of lined up someone to directly purchase the bonds, but to get around or a way to solve the related party issue is also to just do a public offering.
That's
right?
true.
And in that
Although we
case,
have
go ahead.
the only issue with public offerings is, of course, the expense of them.
No,
and then the
Sure.
additional obligations to disclose on an ongoing basis. But you're right. With public offerings, because bonds are being sold to a number of investors,
Right.
oftentimes, sometimes on the short-term deals, we know that there's just one investor, but the public offerings are one way to get around it because of the number of investors that are purchasing bonds on a public offering. I'll get questions. Thank you.
Sorry.
No, thank you.
A,
That's
a
great.
quick follow-up, Mr. Andrews. Does a public offering expose you to yield differences that could cause maybe financing gaps versus a private placement?
Yes, potentially, because, well, and I mean, even with private placements, you have lenders who are, locking rates based upon whatever's going on in the market, but certainly on public offerings, depending upon where the market is, projected rates that you would use in initial underwriting may change as of when you price the bonds, meaning lock the rate on the bonds, which allows the rate on the debt to the borrower to be locked. There are instances where if there's a market shift, that what you were anticipating could change.
Last question. When we think about an ideal transaction type that gets us around that, what would that look like?
Gets us around the uncertainty with respect to pricing, you're saying?
Pricing as well as the vertical with the interesting with the parties being similar.
I don't know that there is an ideal structure because it really does depend upon the budget. Various parties will have financing fees, timeframes that may cause a deal to close on a more delayed schedule than the developer may prefer. So it does kind of depend upon varying factors. It's certainly easy to get around the related party issue, as Tanya mentioned, if there is a public offering. Direct placements, of course, can cut out a lot of the additional fees and ongoing obligations to disclose, although a direct placement purchaser or tax-exempt lender will still require reporting, but it's not MSRB or SEC required reporting, which can have implications, depending upon the issuer and what they have to report in their offering document.
Yeah, I mean, I think, hold on a second. I mean, I think that there's also some, it depends on the product that you choose, right? So like in the beginning of I think the first question, you went through 3 different types essentially of structures, right? And I think each one of those structures, like for example, an MTAB is a public offering. So you may see an interest rate, for example, that is low, but the reason why it's low, if you're, kind of looking at multiple quotes, the reason why it's low is because it's embedded with like a ton of fees because you have to do a public offering. So in order to figure out which debt product is the most applicable in a 4% in my perspective, you really have to look at both the rate and the index on the rate, and you have to less out all of these fees. And so even with an FHA mortgage, right, like when we talk about a cash collateral, we mean that you have 2 sources that essentially are paying for the same thing. So you're paying interest on the cash collateral itself, and you're paying interest on the amount of product that you took out at construction closing. So for an FHA, as an example, yeah, you're drawing it, but the way that I typically see FHAs is that it is cash collateralized. So, I think in some of those instances, it is actually very, I wouldn't be so, what's the word? Enamored with the rate, because both I think FHAs are always like super, super low rates, but I think there's extra interest, right? MTEBs and TELs I think are comparable right now, but there was a time when the MTEBs I think were a lot lower than the TELs. And so I think folks have to, when they're looking at their deals, have to think about the fees as part of the math.
Yeah, the fees, the investment strategy, if you're
Right.
investing the cash collateral, depending upon the rate environment, those are additional proceeds available to the project. TELs are, can be and often are drawdown. And so,
Right.
that reduces negative arbitrage. So you're right, it really does depend upon the structure and a bunch of different components that have to be weighed. So it makes it difficult to really pinpoint like an ideal product.
Awesome.
Right.
Ms. Daniels, we appreciate your presentation, and we ask you to stay around because we're hoping that this great group that is assembled to listen to this information will have additional questions. And just hold tight and don't go anywhere.
Thank you.
Next, we will bring Ms. Dempsey, Tanya Dempsey, to the panelist table. And I have a few questions for Ms. Dempsey, very knowledgeable person, you see. First question, Ms. Dempsey, how does a typical tax-exempt bond deal move through a process?
Well, I think I've seen two types of deals, actually. I've seen deals where a developer kind of has an idea of what they want, and they've got some preliminary work that they've done, and they are induced, and then they don't actually close that deal for another 18 months or 2 years or something like that, right? So I've seen kind of that kind of process go through 4%, where you're inducing super early and then closing like much later. I've also seen some deals where it's a little bit more truncated, where they've kind of been working on their deal, and then they're ready, and so they bring everything kind of to the table all at the same time. I think it kind of just depends on development strategy and kind of how much pre-development money you have. Folks that I think have a lot of pre-development money have, I think their timeline sometimes is a little bit further out, if that makes any sense. But I mean, I think in terms of like overall process across the country, so we see both on the public housing side as kind of developer projects, right? Housing authorities that are self-developing, that have third-party developers, that has we've seen that as a track, and sometimes pre-development can last a couple of years. I know many of you are developers on here, so you know what I'm talking about, because there's some kind of environmental issue, and now you have to abate something and there's no deal, right? And then I've seen it from the other side as like the housing authorities and city agencies as issuers. And from that perspective, I think the process that you guys have laid out is totally in line with how the city agencies and other housing authorities that issue bonds move forward.
Awesome response. As the panelists know, as well as I hope our guests know, that the Housing Authority relaunch of our program will give us the ability to use tax-exempt bonds to finance projects that fit within the scope of our programmatic directives. Can you differentiate for us the use of 9% versus 4% LIHTC in the financing structures of potential affordable multifamily housing development projects, with a strong sense of understanding of the inputs required to utilize a tax-exempt bond allocation in those projects?
I mean, I feel like that's such a loaded question, but I'll take them into two components. The first component is, kind of the difference between when you would choose a 9% and when you would choose a 4%. Typically, in my experience, you would use a 9% for new construction, typically, because the 9% are super competitive. They are, they have to hit a bunch of different thresholds in order to be competitive. And so usually, new construction, deeply affordable would be where I would typically see 9% being used. And actually we've seen a lot of deals go 4% as rehabs, right? Not new construction, but rehabs. Usually acquisition rehabs, particularly on the public housing side, are the traditional deals that we work on, both for on the, as issuer and as developer. And I think a lot of that is because of the, non-competitive nature of the 4% credits. So the credits are, the credits and the tax exempt um, uh, bond amount are related, right? So in order to use 4% credits, you have to use at least 50% of the sort of construction sources on with tax exempt bonds. And so I think, we see a lot. I don't work on, honestly, I don't work on any 9% deals right now. All of the deals that I'm working on right now are 4% tax exempt with tax exempt bonds. And hopefully, I mean, I haven't seen the latest Build It Back Better. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but whatever that bill is that's supposed to come, that's coming up, I think that there might be language in there that the 50% threshold is going to drop to 25%, but I don't quote me on that because I don't know what happens in Congress. But I think that if that happens, right, so if you went from 50% to 25%, I think that the 4% market would kind of explode. There are a bunch of areas across the country that have they have constraints, right? So places like New York and California where there's not enough volume cap to support their programs, their deals. I think there's kind of a big challenge there, and I think that's kind of another reason why having more opportunities to engage in the 4% market in these states are great, and that's one of the reasons why we're super excited that you guys are relaunching this program, because I think it's a really big opportunity to engage on a super, super local level. So Sarah,
Yeah, one of the things,
sorry.
just with respect to, limited volume cap, obviously the reduction, in the 50% threshold would stretch the deals that could be done by the authority. Places like New York use volume cap recycling. That's something that could be potentially possible here, because you can recycle, not just within an issuer's debt, but also using the prepayments of other issuers to the extent that they can reach agreement on that. And so, we've certainly done that. We've looked at using, I have not worked on one of these, but I've recently learned we've used taxable convertible option bonds, so for future volume cap as a method to talk through that. But there are any number of things that you could do to stretch your volume cap. It is, I agree, an issue that a lot of our issuer clients are facing.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, I think again, right now, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you guys have available volume cap right now. Is that correct? I want to say it's 50 or 60, but I'm not entirely, I don't know if that's 100% correct.
That may be trade secret, but we do
Okay.
have cap available.
Okay.
From our issuance, I think we are allocated about 36 million annually. And so we do have some reserve, but as you know, with the state of Maryland, we can't just go back and say, give me my reserve. I mean, we have to ask for it, but we do have volume cap that is available to be utilized. Let me pivot you into another question I think will add some value to what we're talking about. When we look at deals, we talk about deal size, thresholds of deal sizes that make sense to use these financing vehicles.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about what makes sense. I mean, because we look at the fees and we look at the fact that it is great to have what we think is cheaper dollars going into a project as a source of capital. But when does it make sense? I mean, what's the threshold that you've seen that makes sense from a fiduciary perspective?
That's a great question. Also super loaded. I think each deal is different, right? And so again, I think we kind of talked through like in little pieces, right? So one is, when do you use the 9%, right? And the let's assume for a minute that the 9% is new construction and now you're doing a rehab. And I think the choice that you have on a rehab deal is one, right? Like, do you even engage in tax credits, or is this kind of just a conventional debt? That's like one option. I think the second option is, if you're going to use the credits, I think if you're using a 4% credit, you have to engage in the tax exempt bond market, right? Like you have to have that in order to actually receive the credits. And so I think, if you're going to do that, then the second question is, and this happens a lot in cities where there are many options. So, I'll use Colorado as an example, right? There's in Colorado, they have a housing authority that issues bonds. They have their city that issues bonds, and they have the state that issues bonds. And the question is, for a developer coming in, where do you go? Which bucket do you go to? The city? Do you go to the housing authority, or do you go to the state? That's the question. And, I think part of that decision making is about experience, right? It's about what kind of experience are you getting in each one of those municipalities. And sometimes it's not about kind of experience at all. It's about how fast can you get there, right? How fast can you get to the finish line to start doing rehab on these properties that really do need work, right? Like that's kind of what we're all kind of in it for. And so, I think as you guys are thinking about it, the folks that are listening, right? I think you guys should be thinking about, okay, so what kind of are your programmatic needs? And can the agency kind of meet, like, do they align? Are they kind of localized? And, are they gnarly, right? So, is it kind of like a related party issue where you might need a little extra kind of guidance on it, and we might need to figure that out. Like that I think are the key kind of questions I would be asking. And I think that with a relaunch of a program like this, the housing authority can provide, because it is smaller, and I think there's a not that I'm not suggesting that there isn't mission in every single one of these programs, but I do think that the housing authority and has a specific mission, and so sometimes that helps. I'm not sure if I answered your question. I think I did, but
You did, but let me augment it with this.
Okay.
If a deal comes in and a borrower says, we're looking for 3 million in volume cap, and a deal came in and said, we're looking for 20 million. What do we say to both of those borrowers if both of the deals are good deals? Not the credit decision, but what do we say to them? It's a $3 million deal worth their time and effort and the cost associated with.
I mean, I think that there are, smaller deals, right? There are a lot of financing costs in a bond deal, right? I mean, I think that from the developer perspective, you kind of have to think through what, again, if it's a $3 million deal, I don't even know if tax credits are for you, right? Because a $3 million deal might be able to get their deal done with just conventional debt and no tax credits, no bonds, right? I think a $20 million deal probably needs the credits to actually be a viable financial deal, right? And so you'd have the credits, and you'd also, have the tax exempt construction financing.
Awesome. And now I cheated a little bit because that was my lead into your next question.
Oh, wow.
So,
I got
so
another question.
you
Go
have another
ahead.
question. Come on, man. We got to get our time out of you. We got you here. Why waste this
It's a
knowledge
lot of
for this?
questions. Okay.
Okay, this is a good one. This is kind of a catch-all. What advice would you give applicants with potential affordable housing projects that are considering tax-exempt bonds as a part of their sources of financing? Layup, right?
I mean, what advice? Like lots. I would give lots of advice. I don't know. I think finding the right partners and getting your right partners in ahead of time and early is always, I think, my first layer of advice. Because it's funny. I'm on another deal and I'm like, oh, it's gonna be easy, right? And it's like, no deal is ever easy. Can I say that? No deal is ever easy, particularly with tax exempt bonds. There's always some level of complication. So again, I think getting partners that you kind of connect with and can work with, I think are really important so that you can troubleshoot the issues as they come up. I'm gonna Sisera, can you chime in on this one too on advice? So I feel like where do you start, right?
Yeah, I
don't
think
know.
you stole my thunder, which is just just to, well, I didn't have thunder. This is your segment, but just to get your partners in and early and vetted. As the council on the call, I will say make sure those partners include, if you're looking for tax exempt bond financing, counsel that is familiar with the tax exempt bond rules. So these related party issues, for example, that I spoke about, it's always great when the borrower has counsel who understands the rule and they bring a deal to the client, to my client, with a solution. Now, whether we agree with the solution or may have tweaks to it is something else. But it's really critical to work with partners who've been in this space, and to consult your counsel.
Thank you. Thank you for the support. There is a question that's in the chat that I kind of want to talk through for a minute. One of the question is that the bond financing program is long-term with a lot of cash flow uncertainties. How do we shield the housing authority programs from that financial risk and operational risk? So I think that is a great question, right? So in this particular instance, right, the bonds that are being issued, right, are secured by the cash flows of that project, right? So for example, we're evaluating the strength of the sponsor for which the project is coming to the housing authority, right? So what that means is and maybe I should clarify the question, because I think if the project isn't viable, right, then it would be high risk to the housing authority as bond issuer, right? And that wouldn't pass like threshold criteria as an example. And so I do think that the housing authority, to that end, because these are pass-throughs, it is a bit more insulating than if the housing authority was issuing bonds with their own credit, or as the housing authority. And I'm sure, Sarah, you can say this better.
Right, Tanya. So under Maryland law, these types of bonds would not result in direct liability of the authority. So when bondholders or a tax exempt lender makes a loan for a project, or bondholders buy bonds, they are buying essentially the project. I'm skipping a lot of steps there.
Yeah.
But there's language in the agreements that will be executed, which let everyone in the world know that these are limited obligations of the authority, that the obligations are only with respect to the security for the bonds pledged to bondholders, which again, is an MBS or a project or cash, all these different sources that we've been speaking about. There are other things that I have seen done to provide additional coverage that we would talk with the authority about. Of course, everyone wants projects to succeed. We want affordable housing, successful affordable housing in the county. And so while the structures of these deals shield the authority from almost all financial risk, there are other sort of agreements that we would recommend be in place to make sure that we've done all we can to see the project's success.
That is awesome. I'm gonna try to give the D&D connection a rest, but don't go anywhere, guys. We're gonna bring you back because there are more questions. What I want to do is bring up Sydney. Sydney has been very, very patient. Sydney coming all the way from California, and she has that California smile because it's still light out there right now, right, Sydney? We're starting to get a little downturn in the curtains now. But Sydney, your first question. Tell us about MRK Partners, Inc. as a developer.
Sure. So thanks for having me. And I think it's been interesting to hear the relaunch of the bond program, since I think we did an issuance with the authority in 2017. So I would consider that the relaunch, but we'll call it the relaunch now. But anyways, we're an affordable housing developer, and we are bi-coastal actually. So I'm actually in Florida, not California now, but we have offices in California and Florida. And we specialize in app rehab and ground up development, mainly 4% deals. And we've done market to affordable conversions. We've done repurposes. And about half our portfolio is California and the other half is Mid-Atlantic and Florida.
Awesome. Sydney, what part of Florida are you in?
I am in Boca.
Nice.
Very humid here. Lots of humidity, way more than DC.
Yeah, but you have plenty of sun right now and water. Okay, next question, Sydney. Your organization, as you did say, was involved in the acquisition and redevelopment of the Park Tanglewood multifamily project located in Riverdale, Maryland. Sounds familiar?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that project and your use of tax-exempt bonds as one of your sources of financing?
Yeah, sure. So Park Tanglewood was actually a market rate project. And back in 2016, we went under contract on the asset, and we competed with other market rate groups that were looking to come in and do some value add and then push rents. And we kind of came in with the opposite strategy, which was to come in and qualify the residents that were there that would otherwise have been pushed out. So we were looking for a conduit issuance honestly. That was kind of the structure that would work best for this project. I know Sisera and Tanya kind of touched on finding a financing structure that makes the most sense. And in this specific case, it was a Freddie Mac tax-exempt loan. So we met with the authority with Freddie and kind of walk through what that would look like as the authority as a conduit issuer, and ended up using that structure because from a timing, a fee, and just being able to do a conduit issuance, the authority provided us those options at a time when that was what we needed to do to make the deal pencil and work.
From that deal to other deals that you've done, whether it was in this region or not, what advantages did doing that deal with us involved, with the housing authority involved, have over maybe some of the other deals? Was it pricing? Was it
on December the 17th?
Shut up.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you know I'm in charge of it, right?
Hey, yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Again, your deal with that you did with the housing authority as one of the financiers, compared to other deals you've done, what were some of the advantages or disadvantages of using that structure Was it cost? Was it speed to get to the deal? Was it yield? What was it that really made that deal work for you versus some of the other things you've done in other places?
Yeah, so I think number one, not all issuers allow for what is called a conduit issuance. And that does a couple things. A conduit issuance basically allows an issuer to pass through the risk to the lender and the borrower. And so having that flexibility is a benefit for all of the things you just mentioned, from fees, from speed, from additional review. When you do a conduit issuance, the lenders that work on these have gotten very good at doing them. And so just from a process and speed perspective, it just goes very smoothly. And so I would say when we work with the authority, the process actually was really great. You know, I don't know if it matched exactly what your timeline laid out. I don't remember perfectly, but we went through everything really quickly. And honestly, most of the underwriting and the risk was pushed to the lender. So we had prior experience with Freddie Mac and JLL, who was our lender on the deal. And so everything went smoothly.
From my review of that deal, that looked like a pretty good deal, if I may say so myself. Last but not least, what advice would you give to our guests who may be considering a deal structure similar to what you used or your firm used on the Park Tanglewood project?
Yeah, so I think Sisera or maybe Tanya pointed this out. I think having a good team is hugely valuable. And I think that was why the process was so smooth when we did our deal with the authority, even though the authority had not done an issuance in the recent years. It went really smoothly because we picked the right counsels that knew how to solve problems and what to look for. So I would say that is definitely important. I would also say make sure your servicer or your lender, you know, the JLLs of the Freddie Macs or whoever you're using to do that has a lot of experience as well, so that they make sure that they can vet things for you. The last thing you want is to get way down the line and realize that you have an issue that you didn't know about. And then the last thing I would say is the most important thing, I think, in the affordable space, and especially 4% and 9% is cushion. I think, you know, there are always twists and turns and there are always obstacles for these deals. That's what makes them so fun and so complicated. But having cushion, knowing where you have room, and knowing what you need up front to get to the finish line, and where kind of you can move within the box, I think is the most important advice that, you know, we try to follow at MRK.
Sydney, we really appreciate you coming on and sharing with us especially about the Park Tanglewood deal. I think it serves as a beacon for those organizations who are looking towards utilizing housing authorities allocation. At least we have something that we can point to. That is one of the ones that we were part of, and it was great having you a part of this panel. I'm going to pivot now and open the mic for our guest. There may be some individuals from firms within the region who are part of the guests who would like to ask questions that were not included in the chat room. So let's take about 5 to 10 minutes for an open Q&A, and I'll ask our panelists, and I'm going to add our great Nathan Sims to the panelists right now to field some of those questions. As you see those questions, coming into your professional realm. So we'll open the mic for anyone who wants to, and I'll ask that you state your name and your organization before you ask that question. Open mic. And if you're trying to talk, you have to come off mute if you're trying to talk. Okay, we'll ask one more time for individuals who may have questions. I think there's one question that that questions whether or not the presentation will be made available. It would be on the Housing Authority's Bond Finance Programs link. If you go to the Housing Authority's webpage, it'll be there. One question, what is the anticipated bond issuance authority cap for the relaunch? Our cap will be limited to the current allocation. And I think that allocation is around 35 million right now. We do have the capacity to go back to the state to request once our pipeline starts to shape up. And what is the bond allocation? Okay, are there any limits per project? As far as limits per project, I think once we match up exactly what those requests are, and if those requests make through all the thresholds, we will look at providing financing to those projects on a first come first served basis. But it is limited to our allocation. Those are all the questions that I see that are in the chat. I want to again thank our panelists for taking time out of their schedules to be a part of this presentation. I've enjoyed their expertise, the information that they provided to us, and I hope those of us who are in the audience or who have joined us have gotten quite a bit of information from these panelists. I will now bring back Mr. Nathan Sims to close us out with his final remarks and comments. Again, thank you very much. We look forward to answering any additional questions you may have. We will make, again, that PowerPoint presentation available on the website.
That Tuesday when we have our first Tuesday meeting. I'm going to be in a training.
Mr. Sims.
James, let me say, first of all, to you and and to the panel today, thank you for a good presentation. I think it really kind of, I really think it's a true testament in terms of the amount of effort that we put into the relaunch of this program and the people that we're surrounded by to help us execute this. And so I think as we move forward, certainly there's going to be a lot of questions or a lot of discussions that people want to have, and that certainly is fine. We certainly are open for business to be able to do that. As James said, the materials and everything is on our website currently. And as I said, it's a very important tool in the toolbox, and we plan to use it all sorts of creative ways to preserve and expand affordable housing in the county. So stay tuned for, we've been, as I said, we've been busy all 2021. It sets us up for a really busy 2022 and beyond. And this is a great step in the right direction and a great day for Prince George's County. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, guys. We look forward to seeing you as we move forward with the program. And again, thank you very much for your attendance. Good night.